So now, we are going to do breakout sessions. So we're gonna have 3 of them here and 2 in the rooms right behind me. So in this room, we have implementation on my left. We're gonna have community engagement and partnerships here in the middle, and policy here on my right. And if we go out this door on your left, you will hit ballroom D, and that will cover resources. Go out here on the right, and that will cover data, okay? So the instructions for this is, please get into tables of groups of 10. Choose one person within your group to help moderate the conversation, and then choose another person to take notes as you are having this conversation. I've provided some sample questions that the moderators can utilize. Please take notes. You will have instructions in the rooms, and it will allow you to write everything down. And this is important because you will have, in addition to your moderators, which you'll have 3 in each room, you will have a lead of a breakout, and they will compile everything together for you and then come back into this room and report everything back to us as a whole, okay? And I went through that very, very quickly. So we'll, again, if you're confused as to where to go or the instructions, we will have your lead for your breakouts, and they can answer additional questions. So thank you very much.
To go to your brain, they burn off, and all of those little the hairs of the cellulite, when they burn off, they don't stop the cells, they don't stop bad hair, they don't stop. So like your lungs just take it all in. So yeah, smoking marijuana is very bad for you. Does it have other potential medical? Absolutely, that's so bad. But so kids right now are coming home with like diseases that they can't fight because once you're 25 and you're
Welcome back, bienvenidos. So let's get ready for report backs as everyone's starting to. So I'm gonna start with my policy breakout session, and if we could have our lead over there. Also, please keep all of, if you guys can leave us all of your notes. So the plans here are for us to put together a report that will compile all of the recommendations that you've made to us today. So please do so. And if you haven't signed a declaration, please make sure to do that as well. John, are you doing the report back for policy?
Hi everyone, I'll just provide you a brief summary of what the policy committee talked about. Interesting enough, even though we talked about policy, the conversation kept going back to public education and making sure that communities were well educated about the policy and the issues, especially when it came to outreach. And we mentioned some certain immigrant communities that might be wary about even reporting anything that happens in their multi-unit housing because of their status, so being culturally competent in that regard. We also talked about issues of drifting secondhand smoke from local tobacco retailers or cigar shops. And so how does one regulate that? And so we talked about issues of nuisance, but at the end of the day, we came to the conclusion that we want 100% smoke-free policy, no exemptions, no grandfathering, and a strong public education effort to notify residents before and after the process. Did I get it right, guys? Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, John. Jazz, can we do community engagement? I can give you a mic.
Hello, can you hear me? So my group did community engagement, and one of our biggest questions was who should we engage? And some of the groups were youth groups, PTA, schools. Some multi-unit housing properties have after-school daycare that we talked about engaging. Healthcare providers. Let me see. local and regional decision makers, MUH, multi-unit housing, of course, owners and managers, the promotoras, some organizations in our county has that program, and those are good for our priority populations. Another question that we talked about was some of the partners we should engage that go beyond health partners. Gina from Monterey County talked about something that was interesting. You know, I'm from LA County, so we don't see too many farms around here. But they talked about migrant housing, so the people who come down to work on their farms, they are building multi-unit housing properties in those areas to house the migrant workers and making all those properties smoke-free. College students, especially those who are looking to do internships in public health or just want to kind of help out their communities, colleges. A lot of students live in multi-unit housing, student housing, and a lot of them are smokers, so engaging that group as well. And I think did I miss anything else? I think that's pretty much it.
Thanks, Jazz. Let's do data. So, Yaneth. And again, note takers, please give us your notes so we can compile that report, because again, that will be made available through our center, but this is going to be really key in terms of these recommendations.
Great. So for our group, we've discussed data and the data needs that we need in from the community. And we talked about the need for different forms of data, obviously like public opinion polls from tenants and community members, but also doing focus groups and key informants. And also the use of existing data sources like, that talk about mortality and health issues, health conditions, demographic data. All of that is really important and kind of known, but some of the things that are lacking and that the committee or our group recommended that would be good to collect is we've all been talking and we hear a lot about evictions, and so what is the likelihood of landlords, so doing like a particular study with landlords and owners to find out what is the likelihood that they would use such a policy as a tool for eviction? So maybe having that information could give us more information to provide to policymakers. And also information such as the percentage of smokers in multi-unit housing versus the percentage of non-smokers in multi-unit housing. And also something that that was very key in terms of the Berkeley ordinance was sharing with policymakers what other jurisdictions are doing, like actual numbers, like this many cities actually pass multi-unit housing, and this many cities have, a comprehensive, like actually showing numbers of what other jurisdictions have done. And one other thing that we mentioned and we talked about was not just presenting data as in numbers, but also tying in the personal stories when we're sharing data and actually talking about those stories that affect people in terms of second not smoke.
Okay, thanks, Jeanette. Let's have Lydia do our resources breakout. Oh, way back there.
Hello? All right. So our group did resources and we focused on the 3 questions that we were provided. For the first question, which was what resources are needed to support smoke-free housing efforts, the group consensus was providing model and sample ordinances for both policymakers and landlords, as well as toolkits. Also a rehab facility, for example, the Watts Health Center and 1-800-NO-BUTS, but also not just providing them, but making them more accessible. Also an increase in education. As John's group, it was a big thing in our discussions of education. So increased education in multiple forms, that's print and social media, but also they felt that the strongest is the door-to-door to take the information, but also to bring back information on how it's affecting tenants. The second question was, what additional resources do landlords, tenants, and people who smoke need? One of the biggest things was incentives. So for landlords, financial incentives such as the discounted insurance, perhaps housing vouchers, and complying with ADA. And then for tenants, maybe offering some sort of discount for non-smoking renters. The other thing was informing tenants of their rights, educating the landlords about the health effects, and then some enforcement support, which leads us into our third and final question, which was, is there a need to consider sustainability of resources? They said yes. Funding, whether that be using the tobacco tax to provide funding for enforcement, maybe donations from people like community members and small businesses, or big businesses that are part of the smoke-free movement, maybe using grant funding. And then they also suggested that the Department of Public Health get involved to help sustain the resources that are ongoing by providing the funding and helping with enforcement. Making sure that the funding goes to community residents who are helping deliver the message of the benefits of smoke-free housing. Another thing that was brought up was creating a policy without holes, meaning, there's no loopholes, things like that, but also having enforcement lead the development of the policy, as was suggested by one of the attorneys earlier on the panel. Making sure we develop culturally relevant educational materials. And then last but not least, it's important to not displace people, to focus on the issue of secondhand smoke. That's what we had.
Thanks, Lydia. And then last and not least, Claude doing our implementation.
Implementation? Okay, so I'll just stand here and go over the notes. So our focus was around implementation, considering rent control in LA City. And then the other piece to that, as I read my notes, was strategies to be considered, such as signage, leases, educational materials. So what are the best practices and strategies around that? So actually a little plug that's not connected to our implementation portion that someone highlighted. I thought it was really important. But prior to implementation, having minimum of 3 champions, so when the policy rolls out, it can be carried out through collaboration through different departments within the city through their existing mechanisms, because that really ties into the implementation portion and how they can notify the public of the policy. In terms of implementation, the recommendations made considering rent control is to certainly have look at it from the legal perspective and have conversations with the housing department for any potential solutions to that barrier. Other recommendations in terms of implementation, such as signage. I'm sorry, let me go back one more. And it was also promoting through existing partners such as AGLA, as we talked about. But in terms of signage and other implementation, sort of media activities, getting the message out through press conferences, highlighting the positive attributes of the policy, having campaigns such as Breathe Clean LA, and the group came up with that represents the efforts. Sending out flyers through utility bills just to get the word out, and so people are not alarmed when they see the policy. And let me flip my page over. Talked about press conferences, having a database of all the concerns and outline staff recommendations, and getting those concerns from any opposition groups such as Chamber of Commerce, who may be opposed. And then the other piece was around marijuana and getting marijuana, I guess, the advocates, since it's sort of fold into the triangulum of secondhand smoke and aerosols. But just educating folks about the dangers of marijuana smoke as well, because it is such an important piece of the policy. I think that's it. And then also having some flexibility about providing HOAs and management companies with signage, so that if they have, let's say, a concern about, I don't have a budget for signage, here it is. I think that's the main thing. Am I missing anything? No, we're good. All right, that's it, Marlene.
Wonderful. Well, thank you everyone for all these recommendations. And like I said, this is all of your input recommendations are going to be utilized to create a report that we will be sharing with everyone. And especially in light of today's announcement that Councilman Koratz is putting a motion forward, this would definitely advise him as he is moving forward with his elements. So please, note takers, give us your notes. Facilitators, give us the posters that you've written on. You have evaluations in the middle. Please, if you have not completed those, fill them out and hand them over to one of us here. You have Peggy in the back who's holding some in there as well. And I know it's been a really long day, so thank you all for being here to this part of the day. Like I said, we really appreciate all of your input. And before I hand it over to Peggy and John, I just want to say that again, this is really a beginning as it relates to smoke-free housing in the city of LA. So I thank you all for being a part of this conversation. I hope that you will continue to be engaged because again, as I mentioned earlier in my presentation, we need community voices. Public health is there to provide information and education, but all of you have all of the stories. You know what's happening on the ground. So please continue to be in contact with us because we will be in contact with all of you. And without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Peggy and John to give you some closing remarks.
I don't see John, so you know what? I think Marlene wrapped it up perfectly. Thank you so much, Marlene. We will be giving you a report, and some of the information and some of the videos that we've done today will be online, so you may want to reference some of the speaking that was done today. I'm not going to hold you up. We're getting ahead of the curve, a little ahead of the curve of the traffic. It's been a long day and a very tight agenda. We so appreciate those of you who have stayed today for your recommendations. You are making the difference. And so with that, I'm going to adjourn the session today, and I do want to remind you if you can give us your evaluation, because when you think of it, we will have future meetings. We want to make sure that they're the best and that they give you the information that you're looking for. So have a great day. Get back to your home, your families, and again, we so appreciate your being here today.